As we're waiting for folks to enter the Zoom room, feel free to drop into the chat where you're joining us from today, maybe a tea that you're sipping right now or something you're excited to learn. And we'll get started very soon. So for those of you who are just joining us right now, I'm welcoming folks to drop into the chat where you're joining from and maybe something that you're excited to learn today. I see folks from Oahu, New York, San Diego, Washington State, Cascade Mountains, Colorado, another Michiganer, Wisconsin, South Carolina, Miami, Florida, Virginia, Fredericksburg, Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York City, sipping on some ginger tea. We got Tennessee in the house, Ontario, Canada, another Michiganer, Texas, another Texas person, New York, another Colorado, California, more Michigan people, Chicago, Massachusetts, North Carolina, Nebraska, Pennsylvania, New York, Georgia, Florida. So lots of folks from all over the US, Maryland, Connecticut, New York, San Diego, or no, South Dakota, Memphis, and Fort Hall Indian Res, San Diego, Nebraska, New Jersey, Shasta in California, Oregon, Iowa, Haiti, Wisconsin again, another Haitian, Venice Beach, California, Khetnu's neighbors here, Ohio, Western Mass, Boston, Minnesota. We've got folks coming in from all over. So grateful that you're joining us here. As we're getting started, you could take a look at the schedule for today. As we are beginning, these are the folks that we've got here today. We've got me, I'm Jiling Lin, your host, well, your MC for today and a presenter. And we have Khetnu, who's joining us from Washington, D.C., and Nidhi, who's joining us from New York City, and Jim, who's joining us from Michigan. So a little bit of an introduction at the beginning, then the first roundtable session starting shortly. We'll take a break in the middle for some music and a little tea break, and then round up again at the end for more Q&A. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us from North Carolina, Haiti, DC, Texas, Maryland, Illinois, and all these places. So glad to have you all here. Mountain Rose Herbs started the Free Herbalism Project back in 2013 as a way to give back to the herbal community and provide free herbal education to those looking to delve further into the world of herbalism, wild foods, and natural living. This free interactive community event features talks with expert herbalists and a way to connect with other herbalists in the community. Over the years, some of our presenters have included Rosemary Gladstar, my teacher Seven Song, Tiarona Lodog, Howie Brownstein, Mimi Hernandez, Ryan Drum, Lucretia Van Dyke, Rosalie de la Forêt, Thomas Easley, and so many other wonderful herbalists. In this special roundtable edition of the Free Herbalism Project, we'll chat about herbalism through 4 different lenses, through different practices and lineages, including Chinese medicine, which is the lineage that I'm hailing from, Ayurveda with Nidhi Pandya, Gulagichi herbal traditions with Khetnu Nefer, and Western herbal energetics with Jim McDonald. And you, our dear listeners, will be able to pose your questions to the group and get answers to some of your biggest questions about herbalism within the time that we've got available. So how to do that? Use the Q&A button. So if you're using a desktop computer, you'll see the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you're using a phone, it'll be at the top of the screen. And for other devices, I don't know, it'll be somewhere. Click that type your question into the text box. If you don't want others to know who's asking the question, then you can click Ask Anonymously to be anonymous. Click Send, and then Haley, who's the behind the scenes person helping us with the questions, will send us the questions to be answered. And just a heads up, there are lots of you listeners in here. So most likely we won't be able to get to all of your questions, but we'll try our best. So all that said, welcome. We are so glad that you are here. Welcome to this special roundtable edition of the Mountain Rose Herbs Free Herbalism Project. So as an introduction to Jim and Khetnu and Nidhi, I'll have us go one by one, and I'll share a little introduction to each herbalist. And then for the herbalists, if you'll tell us a little bit more about your journey into your particular lineage or approach to herbalism. So let's begin. I'm just going to go down my screen. I'll begin with Jim. Hello, Jim.
Hey, how are you doing? It's good seeing you.
Wonderful. So glad to have you here with us. Jim McDonald hails from Michigan, and his approach to herbcraft is deeply rooted in the land he lives upon. Jim blends traditional European folk influences with 19th century eclectic and physiomedical vitalism, which he conveys with story, experience, humor, common sense, and lore. Today, Jim will share herbal perspectives on herbalism through the Western energetic herbal approach. Tell us a little bit more about how you
Um,
got here, Jim.
so the easiest answer of how I got here is way back in 1994. It depends how way back is, depends on how long anyone's been studying. But in 1994, I had a friend who left a herb book out, and I picked it up, and I was like, "Oh, this is interesting." And within, I don't know, a week, I started digging up stuff in the yard and making teas, and picking stuff and making more teas and making baths and smoking stuff and soaking in different things, and I haven't stopped, and so I'm still here. So I think that like just having the perpetual curiosity, and one of the amazing things about herbalism is the scope of it is endless. And today's topic of the different traditions really exemplifies that, because even the scope of Western herbalism is endless, and all the different takes on it that have occurred over the literal centuries. And then there's other traditions that are just as diverse as that. So I'm delighted to be here.
Wonderful. That original hands-on approach brought you here and brought me here as well, and I imagine brings many people to herbalism. Thanks for kicking us off, Jim. Next up is Khetnu. Khetnu Nefer comes to us today from Washington, D.C., where she operates a mobile holistic healing business called A Soulful Touch. Khetnu is also the visionary behind the Gulagichi Herbal Gathering, an annual conference dedicated to preserving and celebrating Black and Indigenous herbal traditions. Khetnu carries the wisdom of her ancestors into her work, blending traditional and modern healing practices to empower women on their wellness journeys through workshops, wellness products, and therapeutic services, particularly in womb healing and self-care rituals. Khetnu, welcome. So glad to have you here. Will you share a little bit about what brought you here?
Yes, hi, Jiling and panelists. And it's a two-part answer, but I'll keep it succinct. But growing up Gullah Geechee, we preserved a lot of traditional West African practices, and especially in our foodways. So just growing up on a rural island in South Carolina, it was a way of life and not something that was kind of um, passed down in like a formal education. It was just through a lot of witnessing and experiencing, especially from my maternal grandmother, who was known to give you a few things before school and, seasonal stuff. So that was one of the ways, but I became a massage therapist over 20 years ago. And my clients would ask me an array of questions while they were on the table. And so, being the lifelong learner that I am, I wanted to um, be more, I guess, of a help to them. So I said, well, let me not violate my scope of practice. Let me let me learn some more. And so I ended up going to school at the what was then called the Australasian College of Healthcare Sciences, which is now the American Healthcare College of Healthcare Sciences, and studied herbalism. But it's kind of a mishmash and a hodgepodge of different holistic modalities. So that's where I am today.
Well, I love that grandma started you off, and here you are integrating these different traditions and sharing them with so many of us.
Yeah.
So, Nidhi. So happy to introduce Nidhi Pandya joining in from New York City today. Nidhi is a certified Ayurvedic doctor, speaker, and the creator of the Inner Climate Method, a transformative approach that blends ancient Vedic wisdom with modern science. Nidhi brings 15 years of expertise and a lifelong immersion in Ayurveda, inspired by her grandfather, a revered Ayurvedic healer in India. Nidhi's TEDx and other talks have inspired audiences worldwide, showing that vibrant health and happiness are attainable for modern women everywhere. Thank you so much for joining us, Nidhi. Will you share a little bit more about what brought you here today?
Absolutely. And thank you for that introduction. So, I grew up with an Ayurvedic lineage. I grew up in a large joint family, and my grandfather was an Ayurvedic healer. So, my relationship with herbs started very young. But the cool part was that we got to help him to make these herbs. And Ayurvedic herbal preparations are different, they're very unique. And I'm excited to talk more about that. But basically, they were very seasonal and they had a lot of processing and cooking. So we were all recruited to help him to make those herbal formulations. So that's when I got my hands dirty right there at the start. And then my interest, I developed an interest in working with women and specifically all everything that happens in the life cycle of a woman, emotionally, physically. I went on to becoming an Ayurvedic doctor. I had my own herbal tea company. And it's been fascinating to see, even just here in the US, how the acceptance of herbs is changing and evolving. And that's why I'm here right now.
Wonderful. So, grandpa for Nidhi and grandma for Khetnu and parents for me. So thanks for introducing yourself, all of you. A little introduction for myself. I'm going to read my bio also because it's a little bit easier and then go into some more specifics. So I'm a licensed acupuncturist, herbalist, and artist in Ventura, California. My name, Jiling Lin, in Chinese is Ling, Jiling. Family name comes first. I provide integrative medicine and experiential education for thriving personal and ecological wellness through gentle acupuncture and herbs, accessible lifestyle solutions, and empowering classes and retreats integrating nature, art, movement, and ritual. I get the honor and opportunity to host the Tea Talks podcast through Mountain Rose Herbs, write for a variety of publications, working on my first book, and I love gardening, backpacking, and surfing. So back when I was growing up, I'm a first generation Taiwanese American person. So life was pretty traditional, but also complex growing up, speaking Chinese at home and English at school, and not really seeing my grandparents all that much. The foods that we ate were predominantly Chinese, but my mom really loved to experiment. So I credit the basis of my herbal fascination and kind of a kitchen medicine, folk medicine type approach, both in my clinical practice, where 4 years of grad school and a little apprenticeship in Taiwan and traveling many places, learning about Chinese herbal tradition and Western herbal tradition with Seven Song in Ithaca and Lisa Ganora in Colorado and Wise Woman tradition with Lucy Machella and various herbal conferences. I credit that with my family. But in a folk herbal type of way, not in a none of them were doctors that I know of. So this here is a fresh start, which is really fun. So now that we've all been introduced, I would love a little introduction to each of our herbal approaches, with the Western herbal approach with Jim, the Gulagichi herbal approach with Khetnu, and the Ayurvedic approach with Nidhi. What are some of the core tenets to your particular herbal tradition, or how does your herbal tradition approach herbal energetics? Anyone want to get us started?
I'll start. So when we talk about Gullah Geechee medicine or herbalism, it is a whole body approach. And it encompasses mind, body, spirit, and environment. So basically, being that we are people of nature, and spiritualism is very huge because, for those who don't know, Gullah Geechee culture derived from those enslaved Africans who were brought to the Americas, and more importantly, Charleston, South Carolina, where I'm originally from. Washington, D.C. is my home, but I grew up on a coastal sea island outside of Charleston called Johns Island. And with that, they brought a lot of herbs that were traditional to them, from their various regions that they were brought from. And then being introduced to a whole new land, environment, and all of that, they adopted some of the Western herbs that they were introduced to. And so it is an amalgamation of various cultures, not only within, from Africa and America, but from the different countries in Africa, because they didn't all come from one place. So, you had that, and then ingest, you inject their spiritualism and things like that, things that they use to protect themselves spiritually, because herbs are used in that way as well in our culture. So it's an amalgamation of all those things. So it's not a one prong approach, but it's also having reverence and respect for the plants and those plant keepers. I know in the advent of technology and, social media clout, it's so easy to find out information online. Some of them may be correct, some may be incorrect, but I feel like it's taken away from having like formal teachers and sitting with elders and people who've used this medicine throughout, time, and really preserving that information and not just doing things because we see them online. So there's a great respect for that, as well as the preservation of the information. And that's part of the reason why there isn't a whole lot about our culture that's readily available, because we do tend to gatekeep this information, because we have been proliferated with individuals who have commodified our information and passed it off as their own. And so it has made, us very leery about sharing a lot of the sacred stuff. So even things that I present are things that are probably general knowledge to the average person who utilizes these herbs, and they don't necessarily call themselves herbalists because it is a lifestyle for us. So, you're not going to walk around and find, a lot of people within that area who prescribe as such, unless that is their designated title and role that they took on.
Wow, Khetnu, thanks so much for sharing all that.
Welcome.
I love that piece about the herbalism as an integrated part of life. And I feel like that's what I was getting at with the emphasizing the folk herbalist piece, in that it's just an integrated part of the culture. And
Yeah,
unless
definitely.
you're a professional or a doctor, you wouldn't call yourself a herbalist per se. It's just in the food and part of life.
Yeah, like this is what I do. This is how I eat. This is how I sustain myself. This is how my family survives. So, and in context to that too, um, a lot of these larger plantations that were on these islands before they built bridges, they were isolated. So there was no way to get, to the mainland quickly to see a doctor. And even back then, it would probably be so expensive, or because of race, they would not be seen.
Yeah.
So it kind of made it necessary for us to sustain these herbal practices and traditions because it was life sustaining. You know what I'm saying? And so, and that's why it was just passed down generation by generation. And it's one of the reasons why I felt like I was given the assignment of the Gullah Geechee Herbal Gathering to make sure that we preserve this information and make it practical so people don't feel like, oh, I don't know all the botanical names. I can't utilize these herbs, where it's something practical and it grows right there, you could use that. So to really insert the idea that it is a lifestyle thing and not just a profession or something that you feel you need to be, totally immersed in. Not saying that you shouldn't know about contraindications and all of that, but I'm just saying like having practical knowledge of some of these herbs is very important.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Khetnu. Nidhi, you wanted to share something?
No, I said I could go next, and that's why I raised my hand.
Ah, okay. Great. Thank you.
So much, Khetnu. It's fascinating to see how different cultures approached herbs, and there's so many similarities, and there's also, slight nuances. So I'd like to talk about how Ayurveda approaches herbalism. And what's fascinating is Ayurveda looks at herbs and, because herbs also grow in nature. So how do you tell that something is an herb which is medicinal versus herbs that you can use in your food? So for that, Ayurveda goes a little bit deep into understanding the exact properties, right? So Ayurveda has these three aspects: the taste of an herb, the warming or the cooling property of the herb, what we call potency of the herb. And then we also look at the special effect or impact of the herb. So the herb has to be studied in all of three. And it says that that the difference that if an herb is medicinal or not is if its taste and its potency don't have a match. So typically, like if something was tasting sweet, it would be cooling in nature. If something was pungent and spicy, it would be warming in nature. If something was very bitter, it would again be cooling and scraping in nature. But when there is a mismatch in their tendencies and their taste, that's when it becomes extremely medicinal and powerful. And that's very exciting for us to see. How do you distinguish? So the way Ayurveda approaches herbs is again just by going into this entire biodata, this resume that the herb carries, with its potency, with its rasa, what you call rasa, virya. There's also post-digestive impact, right? So once you consume it and go through your digestive system, how does it does it change its potency? Because one of the most important aspects of Ayurveda is looking at the climate of the body. That, just as we know that climate shifts can cause imbalance on the planet outside, the climate shift in the body is what can create an imbalance within us as well. So the warming potency and the cooling potency become very important aspects, as well as if herbs are drying, if herbs are lubricating, where, what organs or organ systems they have an affinity towards, and also the special impact. And what's pretty incredible is that we have all of this literature, preserved from the ancient textbooks, which go into so much detail without any code. You don't have to read code. You just have to know how to decode Sanskrit because it's all in there. And the other aspect is that we also view spices as medicinal. And so it's like, herbs and spices, there's a very fine line between them when it comes to Ayurveda. And spices are those food substances that you can basically use in your foods every single day. And they serve and they serve their medicinal properties It's not just flavor. And that's also what I'd like to say right here, right? A lot of us think that spices are just flavor, Indian spices are just flavor, but they're not. Whether it's using cloves, using cinnamon, using ginger, they're all paired with very specific food items so that any toxic metabolic, once every metabolic process has toxic waste, and any of that toxic waste can then be neutralized by these spices. So this is a few different approaches that we follow. And yes, growing up for me too, like herbalism was a part of life. And in fact, it's a part of, every single meal. In a way, herbalism is a part of every single meal. Everything that is consumed is spice. Whether it's you're drinking milk, it's usually spiced with either ginger, turmeric, cinnamon, depending on what the season is. Meals are always spiced. And then additionally, you use herbs which have increased potency for specific conditions.
Yeah, thanks for breaking it down like that with the taste, potency, and impact. I love the correlations between the different traditions. And in Chinese medicine, oftentimes with more classical Chinese medicine, because there's different types of Chinese medicine also, or East Asian medicine, with herbalism, we'll consider the qi, the flavor, and the temperature, which sounds like what you're talking about. So the qi being how the herb impacts the body. So that might include directionality, like is the qi ascending? Is it descending? Is it dispersing? Is it coming inwards? The temperature is what you called the potency. So same thing, hot, cold, neutral, warm, and cool. And the flavor, we've got the 5 flavors which correlate with the 5 elements, and Ayurveda has their own set of 5 elements as well. So I love the correlations over there.
Yes, it is fascinating. And I would definitely like to add one more thing here that, yeah, the directionality is so important. And what's known as chi in Chinese medicine is known as prana in Ayurvedic medicine. And they're very, very similar. And I keep finding similarities. Also, and I'm pretty certain that this is also in TCM, is what is the herb being consumed with? Like there are nuances that how are you delivering this? Are you delivering it with honey, with milk, with ghee? And even the times of the day, it's such a big aspect that, is it consumed on an empty stomach before 6:30, after 6:30, before breakfast, after breakfast? So there we go into that much. So, putting an herb in a capsule and putting it on the shelf without that directionality is a completely lost idea to me.
Yeah, exactly. Jim, I saw you unmuted yourself. You want to jump in?
I was actually thinking you should go in because Western herbalism is such a
It's a mishmash.
it's a muddle, yeah. But I think from Ayurveda to Chinese medicine works good, and then I'll unmish some of the mosh.
Great. Okay. So bookmarking the unmishing of the moshing, bouncing back to Chinese medicine over here. So how does Chinese medicine approach herbalism? So I spoke a little bit to the flavor, the nature, the qi, and echoing what Nidhi said, we consider how is the herb prepared. So in Chinese, that's called 炮制. How is the herb prepared? There's fire methods in which the herb might be fired up, like a toxic medicinal might be stir-fried until it's charred. Maybe it'll be prepared with ginger, like in the case of Pinealia rhizome or Banxia in Chinese. Or the herb might be steeped in alcohol to increase the warming effect, like with dongquai or danggui in Chinese. That's one of the preparations for increasing the warming effect of dongquai, or it might be stir-fried in salt or stir-fried in vinegar. So there's these different preparations. The 5 flavors of Chinese medicine, which correlate with the 5 elements, I am in love with talking about and teaching about and writing about and experiencing and experimenting with the 5 elements of Chinese medicine because they make such beautiful mirrors and archetypes for how we experience the world and our bodies in relationship to the world. And there's so many different lenses to speak about the 5 elements. So our elements in Chinese medicine are water, which gives birth to wood, which gives birth to fire, which gives birth to earth, which gives birth to metal, which gives birth to water again. And that goes around the circle. And that's a system of checks and balances that's constantly moving, and how the flavors partner onto that are water, which correlates with winter, is the salty flavor. So something like nettles, which is more minerally, or something like seaweed, which is more sodium rich and actually salty. Wood element partners onto the sour flavor, something like schizandra berry or rose hips. Fire element partners onto the bitter flavor in our tradition, and bitter is downward draining. We've got bitters like with golden seal and the gentian root. Sweet medicine is the medicine of earth element, and earth element draws in towards center and is nourishing and mothering. And some herbs for that might include licorice or oat straw. And then the last but not least, we've got pungent, which lots of our beautiful culinary herbs fit the pungent or spicy category, such as garlic or cayenne. So there's different temperatures, the different flavors, the different nature and directionality of the qi, whether something is warming or cooling, tonifying or increasing the body, or sedating or reducing the body. We take all of that into consideration. And diagnostics, looking at how the body is responding to environmental factors. Diagnostics is assessing via how somebody looks, how someone smells, what they're experiencing. So in asking questions, and then also in palpation, if one is palpating the people that you're working with. In my case, I work with acupuncture, so there's quite a bit of palpation. So that's a little bit of an intro. Ready to mish the mosh?
I can try. I think like probably more than the other systems of medicine, trying to say what Western herbalism is really difficult, because it means so many different things. And one thing that it can mean is kind of like a mishmashy kind of lack of any kind of tradition, where it's a lot more biomedical. It's a lot more maybe like phytotherapy as opposed to what I would consider herbalism. I know that there's different ideas about that. And maybe it just means that people into Western herbalism are using mostly herbs that you would find in old Western herbals. I think that actually works pretty good, or American herbals. So if most of the herbs that someone uses come from old Western herbals or American herbals, they're probably a Western herbalist. But I want to kind of say what I do. And because everyone who's into Western herbals, who uses these plants, has their own unique way of doing something. And there may be a tradition involved in it. There may not be. It may be just like a collection of information. I got into using these plants because they were the plants that grew around me. So for me, I use plants that, I mean, right from the get-go, the first plants I ever used were not plants I was buying. They're plants I was gathering off of the land that I lived on. And so that connection for me was really important. That left me using probably primarily a mix of native plants and introduced plants, which a lot were European, some were Asian, but mostly plants used in Western herbalism. As I got more into herbalism, I was exposed to the rich herbal tradition of the 19th century American herbalism. So that's physiomedicalism, which actually has a lot in common, even though they're not culturally connected with Ayurveda. And there's an herbalist named Todd Caldecott that's somewhere online, has a really great write-up comparing like Thompsonian medicine with Ayurvedic medicine, and being kind of astounded at the commonalities between them. He is a Western practitioner, but also predominantly an Ayurvedic practitioner. But I got into physiomedicalism. I got into eclecticism, which was another branch of medicine. The eclectics were like a little bit less rigidly dogmatic about like their system. They're kind of like, oh, we want to use stuff that works, and we'll take stuff that works from physiomedicalism or homeopathy or conventional medicine or old European medicine. Like if it works, we're into it. Physiomedicalism had a specific kind of like system and way of doing things. Eclecticism, less so specific, but in Western herbalism, if you understand herbal actions, you can understand sort of the energetic underpinnings of how that works. And so if we want to go back to older, I'm going to do Western herbalism in quotes here, because I think when people think about old Western herbalism, they think about Greek medicine. And I think that if we talk about Greek medicine, what we are talking about is a Western framing of what I would actually say is like humoral medicine or Mediterranean medicine. And this is the traditional system of Egypt and the Middle East and Southern Europe. And these are very energetic systems. There was a 4-element theory. So you have earth, air, fire, and water. Kind of, you know, like I'm good with 4 elements. That works great for me. I do sort of wish that I had metal. That would be fun. But in humoral medicine, the primary qualities, the energetic qualities, usually it was hot, cold, and damp and dry. And each of the elements correlated with a combination. So air was hot and damp, fire was hot and dry, earth was cold and dry, water is cold and damp. Kind of around the same time, there was another system of medicine existing in Greece called Methodist. And the Methodists believed in like tension and laxity. So they had status strictus, which was tension, and status laxus was laxity. And in the way that sometimes two traditions just can't get along, that like one needs to be right and the other needs to be wrong, they never added that all into the same system. But my introduction to eclecticism was primarily by Michael Moore. My introduction to physiomedicalism was primarily through Paul Bergner and probably Matthew Wood, Eclectics and Physiomedicalism. And my introduction into the sort of energetic system that I use, which is rooted in eclecticism and physiomedicalism, but ultimately in old humoral medicine, looks at hot and cold and damp and dry and tensus lax as the energetic patterns that we're looking at. And we also consider flavors. We consider things that I would say are not flavors. So for me in my tradition, aromatic or pungent has to do with volatile oils and resins. And acridity is not so much a flavor, it's the sensation of irritation that you might get from something like bloodroot, you know? So if I thought about something like acrid, like black pepper is aromatic, it has volatile oils, and it has acrid compounds. And if I thought about bloodroot, it's just irritating without any aromatics added onto it. And those are distinct to me in the way that I would think about them energetically and what their qualities are. Also because maybe the other thing that informs me, so I've got humoral medicine, European folk medicine, because those are a lot of the plants that I end up using, eclecticism and physiomedicalism. And just as important to me, because I'm an herbalist who I collect almost everything that I use. Not everything that I use, but almost everything that I use in my practice. They're plants that I'm gathering. What I'm learning from interacting with plants informs my practice just as much as any tradition. So if something is new to me and I've never heard or read about it anymore, I will think it out and feel it out and sit with it and see how it makes sense and whether it works when I try it myself before I eventually will try it with other people. And if something works out, then I'm all about it. It just is vital, a part of herbalism now, as it was when herbalism was forming in the past. I have so many other notes here. Just like everyone said all these cool things. So if we wanted to think about, Jiling made the connection between qi to prana and Ayurvedic tradition. If we went back to older humoral medicine, we had pneuma. It's basically the same kind of concept. So it's really amazing because when I think about the different systems, I primarily am doing mostly what I would consider Western herbalism with a European basis, because a lot of the books that I can read that are translated into English are more European books, a lot of old American herbalism. Because I do work a lot with plants that grow here, and there are a lot of native plants, I use a lot of native plants, but I think it's important to be clear that I do not do native herbalism. That is a whole different system. That's a whole different tradition. That's not something, I mean, I know a lot about it. I have friends who are native who tell me stuff. And then I ask them, because I think this is a right way to respond to this. And very much what Khetnu was saying about like holding traditions in confidence. If one of my native friends tells me about something to use an herb or a particular practice or a strategy, when I think later on and when I'm teaching, like, can I share this? I contact them and I'm like, hey, was that for me or was that for me to share? I want to be really clear about that so that I can have the respect for other people's traditions that they need so that they are the ones who kind of control how their information gets shared. And I don't just decide, like, I know it, it must be mine. I'm trying not to be that white dude.
I love that question. Was that for me or was that for me to share? Especially if the person doesn't know that you're teaching often and all over the place. And in this case, there's hundreds of people here. Yeah,
Right,
so thank
very
you.
much so.
Yeah, I also found it interesting when you mentioned the different qualities of the four elements minus metal of the four elements. There's particularities that are different in Chinese medicine and in Ayurvedic medicine. And I love that with the elemental tradition, that respect for and relationship with elements seems to be universal. Like lots of old traditions has this earth-based relationship with medicine and with the elements. But when we get to the particularities, there's differences in those particularities. I think you said air is cold and damp, right?
Air is hot and damp.
Hot and damp. Okay. Different for Chinese medicine. Like closest with air would be wood elements and or metal elements, depending on how you think about it. So with metal elements, that's dryness with the autumn time, and then with the element of wood, that's the wind. Wind is the xie qi, or the pernicious influence or pernicious qi, or external influence that's associated with the wood element. So different particularities.
Yeah, Pernicious
Nidhi,
Tea, by the way, would be a great band name.
pernicious qi. Yes.
Exciting to me because that's how Ayurveda, even you said those properties, it's very similar to Ayurveda, except for the air being cool and dry, air
Hot
being
and
cool
damp.
and so for Ayurveda, air is cool and dry, but
Okay.
everything else is pretty much in line. And then air is also has this property of adopting the temperature, the quality of anything that it's paired with. So it can also become cool and dry very quickly. It can become hot and dry when air is paired with fire and heat. So air has this volatile aspect because air is volatile. It's like wind.
Mhm.
But then we have ether, which is kind of just again cool. We have water, which is cool and damp, fire, which is hot and dry. So very, very similar to the same to the tradition. But it's very interesting to see how they are similar and yet different, like you said.
In Islamic or Unani Tib medicine in the Middle East, I think there are more overlaps because it's closer to India. And so some of the Ayurvedic traditions have influenced their take on what some of the Greeks do. And because the Greeks and the Europeans were farther away from India, there was a longer time before there was more exposure. And so I'm lucky that there are at least many texts, including Avicenna's Canon of Medicine, which is translated into English. And although I can't find all of the volumes translated into English, there are, if you look online, you can find PDF volumes of volume 1 and volume 2, which is kind of like the system that they're using and the way they think about things and their materia medica. And it's really pretty awesome. And I think to understand the Greek system that we're, as a Western herbalist, people are normally exposed to, it's really helpful to see where some of those concepts actually originated, because there are concepts that originated in Egypt and the Middle East that later got added into, Western herbalism, that if you're only reading Western herbalism, you would never get that impression. You'd be like, oh, Hippocrates thought of everything, which is not the case.
All right.
Very
So we got 10 minutes for Q&A. There are 33 questions for us. We're probably going to get to one. So this one I feel like is pretty potent for this moment in time. With all the uncertainty going on currently, I'm interested in cultivating herbs specific for survivalism. What are some of the top survivalist herbs you would suggest growing?
That's an amazing question. One off the top of my head would be nettles. Just for their nutritive factor, in case if you wouldn't be able to get to foods that you could readily have if you aren't already growing things. And for just that fortification, this is just the first thing that popped up into my head. And I don't know, maybe y'all could chime in as I think of some other ones. But that's the first thing that came to mind when I heard the question.
Some of the
yeah.
first, Nidhi, go.
Please go ahead. Please go.
Okay, sorry. I was just going to say some of her first plants that pop up to mind for me are the weedy plants that I've seen growing all over the country and all over the world. And one of them is featured in the picture of Jim, if you want to talk about the plant that you're holding in your picture, Jim.
Yeah, I'm glad you said weedy, because I was going to say weedy. So if I think about, like, what we need to cultivate, and I think cultivation is awesome, but I have to admit I am not a great cultivator of plants. Like, if they will grow readily on their own without lots of care on my end, then that's great. If they require care and finesse and tweaks to the soil pH and amendment and all of that, they often grow for a season or two, and then other things come and take over them. But I love weeds. So I love weeds in general. Sometimes I do plant walks, and all I want to focus on is like weedy stuff. And usually if someone's like, oh, for a first plant walk in an area or for a group, I want to focus on weeds, because if I take them out into a bog or into the woods or into like a more established prairie, I'm showing them lots of plants that do not grow within 10 feet of their door, one of their doors. And when we think about, it's really important to understand, there are some toxic or not edible weeds. And we always want to be sure about that before we ingest something. But I would say the vast majority of the weedy stuff that grows, if you don't spray poison on your lawn, is edible, or very gently, very mildly, very safely medicinal. Maybe if we think about bittersweet nightshade, that's an exception to that, and a few other plants. But in my yard, where I don't spray anything, I'm sure I could count 30 things that just grow within a 30-foot radius of my house that I can eat. And if we understand that stuff, we have like stuff that's just right out there, and many weedy things, because of the fact that they're weedy, you can pick and they grow back. So for example, in the picture that Jiling is referring to, plantain, like I can pick plantain and come back in a few days and it's grown some more leaves, and I can pick some of those leaves and I come back in a few more days and it's grown more leaves. And that's not the same for every single plant, but that's the same for a lot of different plants. If rather than picking every dandelion leaf off of a single dandelion plant, you pick a few leaves off of each, several dandelion plants, they will grow new leaves and you'll keep having more food. And if we can take the time to learn the edible plants that grow around us, that will do a lot. And we don't need to be in cataclysmic times to start doing that. What we can start doing is saying, like, wow, a lot of these plants are wild and they have amazing virtues that we can have added to our diet. They have bitterness, they have different kinds of flavors that help our digestion and help us absorb nutrients. And we can integrate that into our diet on a regular basis so that if anything happens, it's a nightmare. We don't have to try to learn everything all at once, right? Because trying to learn everything all at once is hard. Some people are really good at it, but for a lot of people, it's hard. So if you can start saying, like, what are the weedy plants that grow in my yards? Which ones are edible? What can I do with them? In a lot of cases, I think like just a very practical starting place is, it's funny because I'm going to talk about eggs, and eggs are so, like, because of the bird flu thing, they're getting so thing. But like adding leafy, weedy greens into your omelet every morning is a really amazing way to get a lot more nutrition and like have a good breakfast that has a lot of mineral nutrition in it from dark leafy greeny stuff that you can consume easily on a regular basis. It doesn't require any kind of like special cooking skill. It's like grab way more weedy leafy greens that you know are edible, put them in your skillet with a little bit of some kind of lipid, reduce them down, and that's better than putting them in fresh, like right into your eggs, because you can fit a lot more in. And then that's your omelet, and then you can keep changing throughout the season and throughout the year.
Yum. Thank you, Jim. So weeds for Jim. Nidhi, you were going to share.
Yeah, sure. And I completely relate to the weeds. And that's what I had in my mind initially. But then I did want to definitely add, like, growing up in India, there's one survival plant that everybody has, an herb, and that's called tulsi, holy basil. And it's like, it's a staple in our homes because it's an adaptogen, it's a stress buster. It can be used in your foods. It has digestive properties. It's a great antipyretic. There's so many properties that just that one herb has, and I'm seeing more and more people grow tulsi here. It's actually tulsi, but people in the West call it tulsi, but I'm seeing more, and it's holy basil, and I see more and more people growing it in the West. So I think that is definitely a great survival one as well. Plus, it becomes, usually in cooler temperatures, cooler climates, it's annual, but otherwise it can be perennial, but it's still great to have, and it will regrow. The other is aloe vera. I think aloe vera is useful and, again, so easy and hardy. Again, it's just, I mean, like, the idea of also practicing herbalism and the way I do it is also for people to get back into their kitchen. And, when you can work with aloe vera, whether it's for your wounds or internally, if you know how to process it, there's a lot of things that you can do with aloe vera. And then if climates allow it, I would say ginger and garlic are also really great ones because, again, they are food and, food and medicine at the same time.
Yeah, love it. I love that emphasis on kitchen medicine, and then with accessible medicine, and with Khetnu, your plant, the nettles, is also a super accessible medicine because depending on where you live, it might grow really weedy. Over here, that is one of the weeds that has popped up in my garden, is our version of urtica or nettles. Ours is the little urtica, the dwarf nettles, urtica urens, that just came out in our garden, and they're delicious. Some of the other weeds that I was scribbling down that came to mind when Jim, you were talking, there's dandelion, plantain, chickweed, self-heal, yarrow, mugwort, a bunch of those. And then Nidhi, when you were speaking, tulsi is one of my top. That's what I'm drinking right now. Totally one of my top plants, and easy to grow. Loves people. One of our allies for a long time, and other mint family plants too. So many of our culinary herbs are in the mint family. There's so many mint family plants that can be grown on a sunny counter, indoors or outdoors, regardless of whether you have acres and acres of land or you live in an apartment like we do. So some of those mint family plants could include lemon balm, which nice to settle the nervous system alongside your tulsi friend at the front door. If your front door gets enough sunlight. Rosemary, here in our climate, rosemary grows really well. It's a Mediterranean climate here in Southern California. So sages, digestive, aromatic, antimicrobial, so many properties for the sages. And basil is another delicious and medicinal favorite. And calendula and so many other plants. But those are some great starting points that y'all have shared. With that, we come to the end of part 1 of the Free Herbalism Project Roundtable for today, and we'll take a little 10-minute tea break. We've got some music from Ol Sundog and The Wonderful that we'll share with you. And if you have more questions on the break, you can pop those into the Q&A, and we'll try to get to them in part 2. All right. Have a good break. Thanks, y'all.
Set it up. You think you got it down, you fumbled up. Lost on a little man, had a little rush. Round the feelings in graveyard slump. You dry out my bones and wake me up.
Talk a lot, repeat and fade away. Sit beneath the thought to feel astray. I smelled inside the street of compare. When did I begin and sun from where? Face is black, we'll try to hide it blame. Television says the law will reign. Darkness will call, see not the way to fall. Find those like I, peacetime can magnify. Your love should be a little longer, a little longer. Your love should be alright, alright. Come up to the bottom, to the bottom. Your love should be alright, alright. Heard a tree far away. It's a wonderful day. Smile replace, hoping for the happy human race. Think about where I went when I first lost my head. Quality content. Somehow the time I spent felt good.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to part 2 of the Free Herbalism Project Roundtable Q&A section. So we've got Jim back again, joining us from Michigan with the Western Herbal perspective. We've got Nidhi joining us from New York City with the Ayurvedic perspective. I don't think I mentioned I'm joining from Southern California, chatting about Chinese medicine or East Asian medicine. And well, should we get started? We'll just get started, and then Khetnu can jump on in when she gets back. So one of the questions that I was touched by and wanted to answer, that Khetnu, I saw you answered already, is my Palestinian community is in need of some tender, loving care. I would love to prepare a tea mix or tincture to support their nervous systems. What herbs would you recommend to include in a daily support herbal mixture? And Khetnu's response via the Q&A, well, do you want to just talk a little bit about that, Khetnu, and get us started?
Yeah, I just mentioned a few that I use personally, and that are commonly known that a lot of people may know about as well. I'm very pragmatic when it comes to herbalism, but I mentioned lavender, lemon balm, which is one of my favorites and one of my desert herbs. I thought that was one of the questions, as well as chamomile was another one that I mentioned. I typed it kind of fast. I don't remember all that I put, but those were 3 that definitely first came to mind for me. Also the holy basil, which has been very instrumental for me over the last year as well. And given, what they're being dealt with, just a daily barrage of terrorism, uh, the holy basil, and I'm glad that Nidhi spoke about that because it's such a powerful herb in general, and I feel like it doesn't get as much use um, for those type of things that a lot of people aren't aware of it. And I love hearing about it through all, the different systems and all of us, utilizing it. And I feel it's such a powerful nervine herb that could be, very essential to that. And just sending our prayers and love to the people of Palestine as well. So
Thank you, Khetnu. Yeah, the herbs that you'd included in the that you'd written out in the Q&A were exactly those with the addition of skullcap. So a bunch of nervine, relaxing, supporting the nervous system type herbs. Hi, Jim.
Hey, how are you?
Doing good.
When I think about people who are enduring hardships that seem without end, right? It can be really tempting to think like if something is really hard, we need to use some herb that is really strong. And I, as a philosophy, think that like maybe the idea of thinking about herbs as strong is maybe not the right way that I'm inclined to think about it, because if an herb is stronger, then that sort of implies that another herb is weaker. And then from there, we could imply like stronger herbs are more effective than weaker herbs. And we don't want to do that because that's not how things work. The dynamic I often think of is there's more forceful herbs and there's gentler herbs. And it can seem counterintuitive to think that if what someone is going through or if what a people is going through is really, really extreme, that we would want to use gentle herbs. But I think that that's a really good time to use gentle herbs. And I like the phrase like slow and steady for the wind, not pushing too hard on people who are stressed. Instead of using herbs that because they're more forceful, because they're more maybe active, they might be pushing some people's bodies a little bit past where their bodies want to go. And when I think about a gentle, nourishing, and sustaining herbal preparation in my tradition, it would be a tincture of fresh milky oats, or if we can't do tincture because of alcohol for whatever reason, and that may be sobriety reasons, that may be religious reasons, we can do a glycerite of fresh milky oats, and fresh is important. When oat tops gathered in their milky stage dry, they change a little bit. They do lose a bit of something. And so like a fresh milky oats preparation, either in alcohol or in glycerin, and like having that, like to me, the word that I always think of is like sustaining and supportive to get you through those long haul hard times. And this is not something that someone's going to take and like I've got some kava kava here. If I was really stressed out right now and I needed to like calm down right now, I could take kava kava, and that's going to have a more immediate reaction. If I've got something that is a situation where there's kind of no end in sight and I want to be using something like a few times a day over a longer period of time, something gentle like milky oats makes a lot more sense. It's maybe not something that you're going to notice in the first day you take it or the first week you take it, or maybe even the first few weeks you take it, but that gentle, supportive, sustaining action will add up and it will help. For me, because I like formulation, when in many different kinds of stressors or many different kinds of trauma situations, if someone asked me like, oh, come up with a formula for me, I had to say like my first thing I think is like, what am I going to mix into milky oats? And like what you were saying, it could be like skullcap and milky oats. It could be holy basil and milky oats. It could be holy basil and lemon balm and milky oats. There's the holy basil and milky oats and hawthorn together, because hawthorn adds something for like the deep emotional hurt, and the deep emotional hardship that people are going through. But this idea of like always remembering that gentle herbs are not weak herbs, they're not less effective herbs. And for long haul situations, gentleness is like the place to start. And then you add herbs that are more forceful very purposely to achieve very specific ends.
Oh, thanks for that reminder that the strength of being gentle. And I thought of I think by writing, and so the tea that I wrote begins with oats, begins with Avena sativa, Jim. So we're beginning with the same plant, and oats for the same reason, because of grounding, and then coming back to the 5 flavors because oats are sweet and nourishing, and it's a food like herb, and it's mineralizing, and you can eat it for a long period of time. So if there is the luxury of making tea and sending it over or finding ways to supply tea, then the other 3 herbs in the simple 4-herb formula that I just wrote down. Second one, I love throwing a little bit of ginger into everything. I grew up vegetarian, and so vegetarian, we tend to run cold. Ginger is warming and circulatory stimulating and supports digestion. And when there's when there's stuckness, can be helpful to get things moving. That might be emotional stuckness, digestive stuckness, pain-related stuckness. So a little bit of ginger in a 4-part formula, much less, just a tiny bit to get things moving, or something else warming. Lemon balm, or another mint family plant, Tulsi. So Khetnu, this is your friend plant that you mentioned. Lemon balm was the first one that came to mind because of that sunshiny quality of lemon balm and shining some light into those hurt parts, and specifically something in the mint family, because of that aromatic dispersing, a little bit of movement, get things going, open up the respiratory passages, open up the digestive passages, open up the heart, open up the mind. We're opening with something in the mint family. And then the last but not least is something sweet again. Something sweet again, perhaps with rose hips, which also carries a little bit of sour for binding and astringing, or goji berry if one has access to goji berry. So the 4-part formula again is oat straw, ginger, lemon balm, or something else in the mint family, and rose hip or goji or something else that's a berry and on the sweeter side. And when you were speaking of the medicine of simplicity, Jim, the first herb that came to mind is chamomile, because chamomile is present in most grocery stores, and you can bathe in chamomile, you can use tea bags, you can use loose leaf, topical, internal, digestive, relaxant, so many beautiful supportive properties for chamomile. Nidhi.
Yeah, I think you guys have said it all. I really like the approach that that Jim suggested, that you take it slow, because when it's a long period, it almost feels like a chronic stressful period. It's very different from being in crisis. So I think I think my formulation would look very similar. The one thing that I would like to add is yes, aromatics, whether it's rose, whether it's lavender, whether it's jasmine. We also use some jasmine buds. But at the same time, for the grounding, there's spikenard, Jatamamsi. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Jatamamsi. And while Jatamamsi, I would rather use it for those situations or those moments, even in an intense period, which feel a little particularly more intense. So I would recommend Jatamamsi for that. I personally use it widely in my practice. That's a little bit more rare to find. The other thing that I would like to say is that I always encourage people to make a small quantity of tea first, not for their first combination to be their last combination, but to try and test how that works, how it feels, and how the response is, and then to play with it and find the perfect formula for that time.
Thank you so much. Okay, next question. I'm getting everything ready to open up my own herb shop here in West Texas, and I'm wondering what a few of the important herbs would be to start with for opening up a new herb shop. Oh boy, where to begin?
I think first and foremost, when it comes to herb shops, is being mindful of the solutions that you are trying to help individuals with, and also taking in account those herbs that have been over harvested, and really working with things that are local to you, in that bioregional area. I feel like that has been lost a lot. Like I said, with the advent of technology, like people are utilizing a lot of things that they read are good for this specific thing, and it may not be something that's local to them, and there may be something that grows locally that does the exact same thing. So that would be my first advice to you, is to see like study those plants that are available in that Texas area. And then, poll individuals, family members, even the local herbalists and say, what would you suggest that I offer? And would it be something that you would be interested in working and having a relationship with your local herbalist? Because I feel like that is remiss as well. And it brings about that synergetic effect of community so that you are actually being a solution to the community as opposed to somebody who's commodifying an industry that shouldn't be just for monetary gain. And I'm not saying that is your, intent, but, to be very intentional on why you are providing this service to the community and going from there. So that would be my advice as opposed to herbs, because I feel like there's so many herbs, from around the world that you could utilize, but really digging into your why and who you're serving, who are your customers, who's your ideal customer, and what are their needs, and then that will kind of guide, what you want to offer. So that would be my answer for that question.
Hi, Jim. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Khetnu.
I think that is like Khetnu's answer is really beautiful. Like there's a temptation, I'm sure. So first, disclaimer, probably business information, like how to run a business. Maybe I am not the greatest teacher in the world, but ideologically, let me say that I love the idea of, to the degree that it's possible, creating more emphasis on the sustainable plants that grow around you rather than what the popular hot herbs are. Because one of the things that happens with the popular hot herbs is many plants, especially when they're not weeds, really have a difficult time holding up to global demand. So like if an herb becomes incredibly popular and everyone starts harvesting it, and especially if maybe it's slow to cultivate or hard to cultivate, or even just like it's not hard to cultivate or even slow to cultivate, it's just that nobody's cultivating it yet, the impact on wild populations can be devastating, right? And we've seen where there are herbs that become really popular, let's say like rhodiola, all of a sudden became like the really popular adaptogen and everyone wanted it and it's so wonderful. And now, in some places, not everywhere, but in some places, it's on the CITES list. It's considered endangered or at risk or threatened, depending on location. And I know when people are thinking about the sustainability of plants, we want to think like, is it endangered? Is it threatened? Is it at risk? Those all mean different things. So if a plant is endangered, unless it's really critically endangered, it's usually not endangered everywhere. There are plants that are endangered in Michigan that are not at all endangered in other locations. But when we're thinking about sustainability, it's got to be a forethought and not an afterthought. So the way that I like to think about it and the way that I like to teach it is when you're thinking like, oh, this herb seems really interesting. This herb seems like it has a lot of potential or offers a lot of the virtues that I need. I'm going to learn more about it. One of the first things to learn more about it is, what is the sustainability of this herb? And if it's not sustainable, is there something that has similar qualities, right? And when we learn about herbs in energetic systems like Chinese medicine or energetic Western herbalism or Ayurveda, or really any of the many different energetic systems, we can start to be like, oh, okay, this herb has these qualities. There are other herbs have these qualities that may have similar uses or virtues. And I can rely on those because they are more sustainable than the most commercially popular one. The other thing I would add is, I think if you're going to be the proprietor or proprietress of a store and you're offering herbs, it's really important to offer herbs that you know really well. because herbs that you know really well, when people come in and ask you about them, you can say more than one or two or maybe three things. You can talk about them all day long. You can have like a whole bunch of different potential uses for them because you really understand them. You can answer questions about them without having to be like, I know 7 sentences about this herb that I can use to answer a question about it. And beyond that, I don't really have anything else because it's an herb I don't know really well. And I think when we're learning herbalism, an important thing for me at least, and what's important for me doesn't need to be important for everyone else, but for me at least, I want to know herbs and not just know about herbs. Like I want to know, like have a sense of the herb and not just know many pieces of information about the herb. Like, for example, somehow, despite this never being something I've tried to do, there are several celebrities that I know many pieces of information about, but I don't know what they're like, right? There are also herbs that I have never used that I could probably talk for a half hour and say stuff I know about them, but I don't feel like I actually know them. And so I try not to do that. And if what you have in a store are plants that you know really well, it just creates a lot of space to be able to suggest different ways to use them and different herb combinations to use them in, all because it makes sense. And maybe just to finish up, like a last way of thinking about this is I often compare learning herbalism to learning how to cook, right? Except that sometimes when people learn herbalism, they learn about herbs that they've never ingested, they've never tasted, they've never maybe seen outside of like dried, cut, and sifted or in a capsule or in a tincture. And that somehow doesn't seem as weird as if you were to meet someone who was a cook who says, like, I just prepared a meal for you and I've never tasted any of the things that are in the meal. I have no idea how the meal tastes, right? But I know that it's a recipe that's a long established recipe. And so I made it for you, I'm feeding it to you. I mean, I think that to most people that would seem weird. So the degree to which you can know the herbs that you're offering to people really increases the way that you can offer them with a lot of utility and skill and knowledge and insight.
Thanks, Jim. So, Jim, you shared about the importance of getting to know the plants that you wish to offer and that sustainability piece. And Khetnu, thanks so much for sharing about the importance of community and becoming really clear about your why. And I wanted to speak a little bit about body systems, about why people might go to an apothecary. We have a local second generation apothecary down the street from where I live and practice. And I send folks there with formulas. I'll write down the formula on my business card and then give it to them, and then they'll give it to the apothecary, and apothecary usually is able to fulfill my requests. And the reason that they're able to fulfill that request or the request of all the hundreds of customers that come through is because there's herbs for different body systems, for the myriad reasons that someone might walk into a herbal apothecary. So some of those body systems might include digestive system, respiratory system, nervous system, urinary system, etc. It's fun to have some culinary herbs and spices. It's fun to have some fun teas, like different preparations of Camellia sinensis, and herbal teas also for folks who just want to get something simple and easy and drink tea recreationally as opposed to medicinally. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind among the other lovely suggestions that were proposed here. Nidhi, you have something that you want to share?
I think you guys have just covered it all. I love what you had to say, that know your herbs. You know, one of the things that one of my teachers told me is that exactly what Jim said is never use an herb that you don't know. And one of the ways in Ayurveda you do that, even if you don't try the herb, and a lot of herbs used in Ayurveda are powdered herbs, that's the starting point. They use in formulations and they're processed like the way you said, through the fire, through cooking, through pasting. But the suggestion was to sit with the part of the plant that you want to use, and then to like really smell it and feel it and hold it in your hand and meditate on it for some time, and then to experience it. And I've learned that every time I've actually done that, it's the relationship changes completely. You become more intimate with that. I don't have the privilege in New York City to actually grow my own herbs, unfortunately. But even with dried herbs, it's really like, how licorice, once you touch it, you feel it, you smell it. Nobody needs to tell you that it's sweet. The smelling will tell you by itself. So there's so much that you can know about the herbs through just wanting to know them. And I think it's such a beautiful thought that the first idea when you want to open an apothecary or an herbal store is to say, hey, what's trendy? What's out there? Let me just bring it all. Let me, look at the economics and the business aspects. But really, it's a sacred place of healing, and to also have that mindset that this is a sacred place of healing. And you want to know yourself better when you enter, and you want to know parts of the nature of the universe better. And I think for that, I think with that intention, I think, or like even with an herbal store comes great responsibility. And I think to tie it all in together, so it can really become that place that it deserves to be.
I love that practice, Nidhi. That's so beautiful. We did that in Chinese medicine school as well, and it was one of my favorite things. It's a slow way to get to know herbs because you're going one herb at a time, as opposed to here's the materia medica, memorize it. The one herb at a time, you sit with it, you taste it, you look at it, you smell it. The organoleptics method of sensory getting to know you is fun. That's why I got into this. It's fun. It's yummy. It's colorful. Yeah. So thanks for sharing that. Hi, Jim.
Hey,
You unmuted yourself.
I
Oh, that was an accident. Okay.
yeah, probably answered it.
Okay. Well, Nidhi, what you said leads us beautifully into the next question, which is, I heard that back in the day, folks learned about what plant was good for what because the plant told them. So could we do that also? Is it a language of frequency? Just ask yes or no questions. Amazing the answers one can get. So I guess the question is, how do you communicate with the plant world? Can you just talk with them? What are some of your ways of getting to know plants? Okay, I want to start this one. One of my beginning teachers, Doug, in the desert Southwest, spoke with plants. And I love that. I definitely speak with everything. I speak with rocks, I speak with plants, I chat with the ocean when I'm in the ocean, I chat with everything. And I love the reciprocal, it feels reciprocal. I love the verbal relationship that I have with the world because it feels like I'm sending my words out into the air, and usually it comes back as feelings. Sometimes it comes back as colors. That feels like more of an energetic relationship with the world. And that is one of the ways for getting to know plants. And then what we just spoke about with organoleptics, or the sensory approach to getting to know plants, is one of the foundational pieces that I teach folks for intro to herbalism type classes and plant walks also. So we're stopping under this tree and let's take a look at the leaf. Do you notice what the margins or the edges of the leaf are like? What's the tip like? What's the color? Take a look at the texture. Maybe put your face up against it, sniff it. Oh, listen to the leaf. What's the leaf sound like? Give a little tap. So these experiential ways of getting to know the plant, and maybe there's a verbal communication that comes into that because some folks communicate in that way. Just like how we learn in different ways, we have different ways of communicating and receiving information. So this feels really personal. This feels like a really personal way of getting to know plants and also getting to know yourself. What ways of communication feel natural and appropriate for you. And also your particular plant, because there's, of course, plants that you need to be careful with.
Yeah, so I think about this a lot. I think that how personal it is really important, and how individual it is a really important distinction, because we might have a teacher or read someone's, book or website or whatever and be like, oh, if you're really attuned, the plant will turn into this green human-shaped something and it will tell you something profound. And, then you'll like know what the thing is. But there are people that's not how they interface with the world, right? So just quickly, there's this thing called aphantasia. A lot of people don't know about it. Some people do not visualize. They are not visualizers. If you ask them to visualize an apple, that's not what they do. They're like, I know what an apple is, but they're not seeing it. And those people are never going to see the plant become a green person with, viney hair or whatever. And then another thought that I have is that I don't think like plants ascend to a higher level of spirituality or whatever you want to call it if they look human and talk to us in human words, right? And so what I think is if you want to know plants, you really want to connect with plants and you're able to spend time with them where they grow as plants. I think that the way that they look, the habitats that they grow in, what they taste and smell and feel like really are their language more than their language being like a profound sentence in English to me. And it's not that if someone gets that, if they pick up on that, because that's the way that they, interface with things, they're really like they a friend of mine is like, oh, I can visualize the apple and little bruises and which parts are red and yellow and what the stem looks like. Some people like that, they might get that, and that's awesome. That's really great. But I've met a lot of people who felt, unfortunately, like kind of inadequate because that's not what their connection was, right? They never saw the plant as like this green person who came and said something super profound to them. They just got ideas and impressions. And that's what I get. Really funny story. The second organized herbal anything that I ever went and attended was this weekend with Stephen Buhner out at the United Plant Savers Botanical Sanctuary. And the entire weekend was visualization exercises. And everyone would go through and be like, tell what their visual, what things that they saw. And then it would get to me. And I was like, saw kind of like green and purple blobs. Not much more than that. But I got the impression that da 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 da. And it was like that for every single exercise, right? Um, and afterwards, when it was all over, someone came up to me as I was walking back to my car and they're like, oh my God, I didn't see anything either, but I just like couldn't say anything. I can't believe you just like said the entire weekend that you saw nothing. And I was like, well, I didn't see anything. I'm not going to lie about it. People's relationships with plants are unique and they're individual and they're really personal. And one way of connecting with plants is not inherently like a better way than another person's.
Thanks for that fun story. I love imagining you seeing the green and purple blobs and then speaking about your experience. And that individualization piece is so important. Nidhi?
Yeah, that's really funny. But when you first asked that question, one of the thoughts that came to my mind is like plants are like people. You have to see them through their experiences. And I also think that our ancestors knew about plants because, like Jim said, they basically grew them. They saw those herbs growing and the habitat and everything that it took. I was once talking to somebody and this uh, and her daughter was raised primarily by her nanny, and she said that my nanny knows my children better than I do, because the nanny saw all that, how the baby and then the toddlerhood and then the adolescence and all of that. So it's basically he who grows or she who grows the plant knows it the best. And unfortunately, while we can't go back all the way, I think as close as we can get to that process, like I will never miss a chance to go to an Ayurvedic farm and take a look at how, whether it's herbs or just foods like rice and grains they're grown, and that you can tell so much that, oh my God, look at the amount of irrigation, water it has, the temperature it grows in, the climatic conditions, the soil. And I think that tells you so much about the herbs as well.
Yeah, getting to know the natural environment that the herb grows in definitely gives us a lot of information about how the herb might respond to its natural environment, perhaps what phytochemicals it might produce to defend itself from the invaders and pathogens in that, and extrapolate or have a better understanding or a hint of how that might affect us. Khetnu, do you want to share a little bit?
Yeah, pretty much, what everybody else said. And it's like, and I love that Jim, made the delineation between it being personal and individual, because like he said, everybody experience isn't the same. And, in this culture, as especially American culture, we tend to put bias on people, and we lump people into groups. And like how the whole toxic positivity has become a thing, and people are like, you know making people feel like I'm not entitled to feel how I feel. And the same thing with learning with the plants. Like, everybody can't come to herbalism in the same way, and you have to seek out that route that works for you, and given a template to say, yes, go and sit with the plant and be in an environment. I think that's a very good primer. And then going from there and seeing like, okay, now let me taste this herb. Let me, do different things. And, really seeking out a teacher that, that embodies that thing that you're trying to have. And I feel like sometimes people just latch on to the first person that, they encounter, and they don't really try to, see what's truly out there. And because of our short attention spans and things like that, it makes it so much easier to just log on to a social media post and, say, oh, okay, well, they look knowledgeable, blah, 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 blah. And they may have just Googled something and just, read it out loud to you. But at the same time, really seeking out what works for you and trusting your intuition as well. And asking for guidance, because I feel like we all have our own inner GPS, and we look for validation outside of ourselves. And it's time for us to really get back to basics and getting in touch with who we are, and then learning and connecting with nature in that way, and the herbs in that way, and the plants in that way. But Jim also brought up a great point about seeing that environment. Like, why does this grow in this, this bog? Why does this grow in this swamp? Why does it thrive there? What are the other plants that are thriving there? And what are their relations to each other? You know what I'm saying? And just like in gardening, certain plants work together. The three sisters, work together, and they thrive together. So it's just that practical application that I feel like we get lost on, because we want to get into all the scientific stuff and all that other stuff, and we miss the basics. And and I feel like that herbalism approach, if you try to get to the basics, learning how to make a decoction, how to make a tincture, how to make a balm, you know what I'm saying, before you try to sell it to anybody, anything like that, have you tried it for yourself? Everyone has something going on. It could be just a sniffle, a food allergy, a headache. We all go through maladies at some point in time in our life, and then using what resonates with you in that way works. And someone mentioned in the chat about, trusting your clairs. If you're clairvoyant, you're clairaudient, or whatever, it doesn't have to be highly developed, but we all have that. That's what I call your inner GPS. Like Jim said, he trusted his inner GPS to say, you didn't see anything, so don't don't sit here and lie and say, yes, I saw the green dancing man. I only saw blobs. That's my truth. And walk with that. You know what I'm saying? Because then it leads him to go into another direction to say, hey, maybe this is the approach that I need to take. Is there something else out there that probably resonates with me and that I could utilize to enhance my herbal studies and my herbal practice?
Lovely. Thank you so much, Khetnu. Trusting the inner GPS, trusting the blobs, trusting the Claires. I love that way of thinking about it. Thank you so much for all of your insightful wisdom on this process of getting to know herbs. Our next question is, I have a lot of chronic shoulder or neck pain. I'm interested in making a poultice or salve with fresh turmeric to put on the area. Does anyone have suggestions? So first person that comes to mind, of course, is our Ayurvedic person, but I do want to expand that question to potentially what else comes to mind for other folk with chronic shoulder and neck pain. But Nidhi, do you want to start us off for this one?
Yeah, so the desire is to use turmeric. Is that what you said?
Yeah, they want to make a fresh poultice or salve out of turmeric to put on the area of chronic neck and shoulder pain.
Yeah, so I definitely want to say you want to be careful with how you use that turmeric. I think sometimes people, just like one of the things that we said that, hey, you just, and especially when people use fresh turmeric and people use all kinds of things. So I would definitely want to say you want to be careful in your use. I'm sure everybody can think of great herbs to add to this. But, so either you would use one of the traditional poultices that are used very often in Ayurveda has is a rice-based poultice. Now, the problem with these are that these have to be made fresh almost every day. So you cannot reuse the poultice because it's freshly rice-based, but it's extremely healing, especially to shoulder injuries. There's a process, however, to it, and I must give it with the whole protocol and the process. So it would start with using warm oil on your shoulders, and that could be done in either two ways. That would be either you pour oil. There's a system that's called dhara in Ayurveda, where you take warm sesame oil, or there are certain particular medicinal oils, and one of the oils that's used especially for this purpose is called murivenna. I'm just going to spell the name, Murivenna, and you would warm the oil and you would pour it just out of a nozzle of a thin, long oil bottle. And if that's hard for you, then you would just apply that and probably even take some steam to get everything here to open up in your shoulder region. And then you would make the poultice with, then you could add some, kind of take rice. You would cook it in either some ghee, but you would dry it. You would cook it till it's dried. And then you would add turmeric, you would add flax seeds. So some of the herbs that come to mind are flax and turmeric. And I'm sure you all have other ideas as well. And that could be made into a poultice. And this could be done every day. So when I have people who have these injuries, I'm like, you know what, eat rice every day. And then you use that, make a little bit extra batch, and then you can use it in that poultice.
That sounds delicious. With
I know,
the
honestly, it sounds like food, but you don't eat it afterwards.
yeah.
But you just use it and you tie it, and then you kind of use it and you massage your shoulder with it. But it's a very healing, it's a very different idea of a poultice from what we're used to. And there are also other poultices which are made with powdered herbs. But this is the one that I would recommend especially for the shoulder.
Oh, I love that. The rice, turmeric, and flax as a topical poultice sounds really healing. Thank you so much for sharing that, Nidhi. Any other takers for this question? Jim, you're muted. I see your mouth moving. Oh, Khetnu, you just unmuted.
Oh, go ahead. Jim can go first. Oh, you. Well, I didn't have a herb per se because I am a massage therapist by passion. So I would first say get an awesome massage. But as a massage therapist that is also an herbalist, I tend to utilize more essential oils, more than fresh herbs or dried herbs. So I wouldn't use a poultice per se, but I would use essential oils, which are technically herbs. And copaiba oil is one of my go-tos right now because it works on the same pain receptors that CBD does without using CBD. And copaiba is a resin that comes from a tree in South America, but it's such a good benefactor when it comes to pain and relinquishing that pain and really soothing that area, and also being mindful of your body, and a lot of shoulder pain actually starts in the back, in the lower back, and it refers to the shoulder. So more times than not, when someone tells me they have neck and shoulder pain, I work on their lower back first, and it tends to alleviate that because your body wants to always remain in homeostasis. And so because your spine is your stabilizer, and sometimes your shoulder and your neck have to compensate for your back working really hard. And so that would be the one thing that I would recommend right offhand, right off the top of my head, herbal wise, on that Copaiba. I saw somebody mention marjoram. I also use marjoram as well. The marjoram essential oil is really good for relieving pain and muscle relaxation.
Thanks for bringing in the body and the importance of posture and the whole system, Khetnu. Hey, Jim.
Hey, so I'm going to call Khetnu and be like, hey, my shoulder hurts. Can you bring that Copaiba oil over? That sounds like a really great idea, because it's pretty awesome when you can get someone to rub something on it. So I have only marginally used turmeric topically, and one reason for that is just a practicality issue, which is the color. Like if we've got clothing or sheets or something, that we're going to put it on, and we have to deal with stains. I really love Dr. Bronner's salsas for getting stains out of stuff that you never thought could get out of stuff, especially if there's oil involved. So that's a little tidbit. I forget who I learned that from. Salsas specifically, Dr. Bronner's salsas really gets oil stains out of things. But I'm going to do a single herb infused oil that I love, and then like a combination. They're slightly different, but I learned from an ethnobotanist named Rob Montgomery. It's someone who lived in Northern California. I never met them, but they sold an infused kava kava oil. And I got a sample of that, and I tried that out, and I was like, this is amazing. And then, sorry, but I never ordered it again. I just started making it myself. So I get dried kava kava, infuse it in oil. I personally do it in a double boiler over low heat, 100, between 100 and 130, closer to 100 is better. And I'll infuse it for like about a week if I can. I know that seems like a long time, but it extracts a lot of cavalactones. And then after you strain it out, putting that on topically is absolutely amazing. I mean, it's probably qualitatively different than anything else I can use. And I think the world of that particular preparation, and that everyone should have it. So if you've not made that board, if you've never made a kava kava infused oil before, highly recommend it. Another thing that I use specifically for like tension and for cramping is actually bioregional, like I'm supposed to be most of the time. And it is an infused oil of goldenrod and lobelia inflata, and not quite bioregional, but I can get it from my grocery store or some local growers, ginger. So we've got infused goldenrod oil, works kind of sort of arnica-ish. And I learned that a long time ago from Barbara Hall, and it's held up over decades now. Lobelia topically is a spectacular antispasmodic, just like lobelia internally, although internally it is a low dose botanical. And ideally, we're going to want to use it as a tincture, because if we make lobelia tea and we drink it, we're probably going to throw up. And most people don't want to do that when they have a tight shoulder. And then the infused ginger is just to add a warming actor and to bring blood into the area. And that particular formula, of which I might tweak, I might add poplar buds to it, I might add a whole bunch of things to it, but that's just a basic 3-herb triad, is really nice specifically for not just like it hurts, because joints and muscles can hurt in different ways. They can be sore and tender, or they can be really tense up and cramped. And if we have tensed up and cramped, that is a blend that I really like. or the infused kala kala oil.
Thank you so much, Jim. So far we've got Copaiba with Khetnu and marjoram essential oil, the yummy tasting or yummy sounding but not tasting poultice from Nidhi with the rice, turmeric, and flax. I'm hungry, can you tell? And then with Jim, kava infused oil and I love she adds goldenrod, lobelia, and ginger. So Chinese medicine, I wrote an article maybe last year, maybe the year before for Mountain Rose about trauma liniment or dietajiu. And it's definitely not a 1 herb or 3 herb formula. It's one of those longer formulas from Chinese medicine. Oftentimes you'll hear folks call it in English hit medicine or dit dat jiao. And what it is, it's a combination of many blood-moving herbs, so stronger herbs that are nice applied topically onto areas of injury, particularly more acute injury. So maybe not applicable in this particular case, but that's a topical formula that I like to turn to in the clinic, and that includes dongquai, Tranxiong, which is lovage or ligusticum, one of our Chinese herbs, frankincense and myrrh. There's turkey rhubarb, another Chinese herb called da huang, and safflower. And I modified that one to include arnica. But I might take arnica out and try goldenrod instead, because here in SoCal, we've got our local variety of goldenrod also. And here in SoCal, there's sagebrush. In the desert west, there's different varieties of Artemisia. Here we have Artemisia californica, and there's Artemisia tridentata, which is the Great Basin sagebrush, or the sagebrush that is in a lot of these areas. And one of our local herbalists, Lanny Kaufer, writes about in his book about the sagebrush liniment. So infusing sagebrush, whatever Artemisia species you're working with, particularly tridentata or here californica, in alcohol. It can be drinking alcohol or just rubbing alcohol, which is cheaper, letting that infusion sit for 2 weeks or longer, straining out the plant material. And then with this strong liniment, you're making a strong liniment, applying that to injured areas, and maybe partnering that with a nice massage, Khetnu style, maybe partnering that with a liniment or with a poultice, Nidhi style. Try on for yourself what method works best for you and experiment with other plants as well. Next question. Thank you so much for this foray into the world of pain and topical herbs. This one, we're coming into internal herbs again. This person says, I would like to start with a herb or tea that you recommend for a sore throat. I'm new to the community and journey. Thank you. So, materia medica or considerations for sore throat.
Okay, I'll go. I would like to propose that one of the best things for sore throats is, rather than thinking tinctures or teas or syrups or lozenges, to chew on herbs, right? And I can go in different directions with that, because when people ask me a question like, I have this issue, what is a good strategy for that? Rather than answering with an answer, I usually answer with more questions like, oh, what kind of sore throat? What does your sore throat feel like? Is it, maybe there's infection, but maybe there's not. Maybe you have a sore throat because you're in an AC/DC cover band and you're screaming Back in Black and, like you're a problem child all the time. And it's just abrasion. And in that situation, things I might chew on would be like more slimy demulcent things. So it could be like chewing on fresh violet leaves. And I don't mean chewing on like bubble gum, but like giving something, a wad of leaves, a couple chews, depends on how big the leaf is, and sticking in your cheek. And if you have a demulcent herb that has mucilage in it, as opposed to a demulcent herb like licorice, although that would work too, that gets slimy, mucilage is extracted by water. Your saliva is mostly water. And so your saliva will get a lot more slimy, and that will be lubricating to your throat. So if you have a dry, scratchy throat where there's a lot of friction, it can be helpful. Plantain is going to be helpful there, although violet leaf tends to be more mucilaginous. Sassafras leaf is more mucilaginous. A less mucilaginous, but I'm going to admit to like, I just loathe licorice flavor. Like if it's a little bit in a tea mixed with other stuff, it's great, but chewing on licorice is not my jam. Chewing on Codonopsis is totally my jam. I love a Codonopsis chew. And so that will be something that I think is like chewing on some Codonopsis root and keeping it in your cheek. And then like at a certain point, it stops being slimy. We can move on from that. If we have an infection and that's a part of our sore throat, it doesn't mean we don't still think about whether it's dry and scratchy. It means that we would say like, oh, if it's dry and scratchy and infected, we can add maybe something aromatic because all the volatile oils are some degree of antimicrobial. And there's a whole bunch of different aromatic herbs we could use. They're very strongly aromatic herbs like Monarda fistulosa or oregano we could use, but we could also use things that are milder in nature, that taste maybe a little bit easier. Mints and holy basils and lemon balms are still going to be antimicrobial. And we could mix that with a more demulcent herb. So we're hitting both the antimicrobial action and also the moistening dryness or action. Sometimes people have sore throats that are like less dry and they're really gunky, you know? And so there's like a lot of secretion. And we might want something more astringent. And so we can add something, and we probably don't want something really astringent. We don't want to overshoot the mark and go from like oversecretion to dry, you know? And if we use like oak bark, we would probably go from oversecretion to dry. But like strawberry leaves, I think are kind of perfect. And a lot of people grow strawberry leaves. And so we can pick them throughout the year and use them as a mild astringent to lessen oversecretion. So there's a lot of options. But one of the things I love about chews is if I have, you know, a tincture and I have a sore throat, I can squirt it on the back of my throat and gargle it. And then I swallow it. And after a little bit, it's gone. If I have a syrup, I don't have a syrup around, but if I had a syrup, it might coat the tissues a little bit longer. But after like 5 minutes, it's not there anymore. If I drink tea, for the duration of time I'm drinking that tea, I'm getting an action directly on the affected tissues. But then when I'm between cups of tea, there's not an action. If I have some herbs in my mouth and I can keep replacing them, I can have a direct action on those affected tissues for the duration of time that I have the herbs in my mouth. And that's really good. And I feel like when people talk about herbal preparations, chewing herbs is always seemingly left out. Like if I think about like the books on herbal preparations, like how many of them have like a paragraph even on like just chewing stuff? Not so much. So I'm really a fan of that. I know that a lot of people, when they think about chewing herbs, they might think about one of my favorite herbs, sweet flag or calamus root, Acorus calamus. Amazing chew, antimicrobial because it's aromatic, also quite bitter. The flavor can be challenging for some, but I think is amazing and can be really helpful. I know a lot of people may also think about OSHA. With OSHA, there are some sustainability considerations to think about and where you're sourcing it. I know occasionally Mountain Rose has organic OSHA, and that's really great. I know in the Pacific Northwest, there's Oshala that people use, Ligusticum greatii. But another plant that is really quite OSHA-y that can be easily cultivated is lovage. And that is like, I think when people are thinking about like, what is a sustainable substitute that I can use for OSHA, I would encourage people to look at lovage, and you can definitely use lovage as a chewing herb, and it would be the root that you use in that situation.
Thanks, Jim. I love, you're writing a book too. Both of us should include the chewing section, if you haven't already included that in your book about chewing herbs as a extraction method.
Ideal extraction method, totally underutilized.
Hey, Nidhi.
Yeah, I cannot give, and I know we have limitation of time, and I'm sure there's some other great questions as well, but I cannot not give this very simple remedy for a sore throat. It's something that I almost swear by and this works in the start of almost any kind of sore throat, especially if it has to do with, depletion, just maybe travel, or even the screaming, but just with the oncoming of a sore throat. And it's a very unique remedy. And again, this is taking a clove or two, biting into the clove. So you're not really chewing it at that point, but you leave it in your cheek pocket overnight. And it is magical. So as you leave it in the cheek pocket, and if you're a nasal breather, which we should all be nose breathers, for health ideally, and when you leave it in there, and that slow release of the compounds from that clove, it's overnight. It's magical. I personally never travel anywhere without cloves, because this works not only for sore throat, but it also works if you're exhausted, if you've depleted yourself to a point of burnout where everything in your body feels hot and dry, which is that's really the first sign of a sore throat as well. It works really, really well. Later on in sickness, which means if you have a lot of mucus, if you have a lot of phlegm, it may not be that effective. But if this is what you use at the onset, it's a game changer.
So not in the chewing category, but a tucking of the clove into the cheek. And I love that you travel with that. I'm always so curious what people travel with. So thanks for that tip.
Thank you.
Khetnu, you got a sore throat something for us?
I like what Jim said. Something that I rarely do, but licorice root, like the licorice sticks, have been very beneficial to me. And something that we travel with, you can just have. I remember we were coming back from Mali, and my partner thought that you had some licorice root in his bag, and um the customs officer was like, "What, you bringing back trees from Mali?" But that's one of his medicinal medicine bag kind of things, and to have on hand for things just like that. And it goes back to the chewing aspect, like chewing on that licorice stick. Really helps that, and it's antifungal and all of that. So you get in, and you can actually use it as a toothbrush as well. So that's one of our ones that we tend to use a lot. And growing up Gullah Geechee, mullein was used for that a lot. Having some mullein tea, anything in that upper respiratory, that throat area, that was one of the major go-tos that we had. And until today, I was just talking to an elder who made my sweetgrass earrings last year, and she was telling me, that they used it a lot topically, and that they never ingested it, so they would use it as a poultice on those type of areas and things like that. And I, growing up, I never used it, topically, so I thought that was really awesome to learn that it was used in that way for different things. So yeah, so those would be the two that I could think of right offhand.
Great. Mullein, licorice, and then, gosh, look at those earrings. I didn't realize they were sweetgrass. Amazing. I love these different perspectives. One thing that I want to add, besides licorice from Chinese medicine tradition, is the practice of gua sha. So gua sha is scraping. So you can, I don't have a gua sha tool next to me. Yes, I do. Okay, so here's an example of a huge gua sha. So this edge of the piece of wood is smooth, so it can be used for scraping. So if the congestion is in the chest area, if there's congestion there, and particularly at the first sign of illness, so you've got the clove tucked into the cheek overnight, and then in the morning time, you start chewing on your licorice roots. Something else that you can add to the protocol for this sore throat you've got is gua sha. So applying some kind of aromatic oil onto the chest for lubrication to start gua sha, and then beginning the scraping process with whatever gua sha tool it is you're using, moving from the inside outwards to help and physically move some of that congestion outwards. And once opening up the chest area, opening up the lung area can support upper respiratory area as well. And then usually with throat, there can also be a correlation with the nose. Doing a steam can feel so lovely, especially if something is stuck. So making some hot water, putting in some aromatic herbs, standing over that once it's cooled down enough that the steam doesn't burn you, throw a towel over your head, inhale deeply, absolutely lovely. I think we are down to our last question. The time really flew by. There are so many fantastic questions in the Q&A area. There's a bunch that we didn't get to. So thank you to our sweet listeners today for sharing your questions with us. And so there's a lot of questions about how to get started learning. So different ways of learning herbs, either through books or through classes or whatnot. So I thought this would be a good time to discuss some of your favorite books and resources, and also share a bit more about your own work and how do you keep in touch with you or find you and learn more about you in this wide, wide herbal world. Whoever wants to get started.
All right, I'll go. I want to type the name of the doctor who has the most incredible Ayurveda book, Materia Medica, on all the herbs and the plant, where they grow, how to grow them, as well as their properties in terms of what I talked about, the taste and accordingly the potency and how they can be used. And this is his name, Dr. Heber, and he has a book of compilation. I think it's available. I'm just going to give the full name. And I think it's available on Amazon. So that's what he does. And just, you can find me on my website, nidhi.me. My work is primarily, it's not just herbal medicine, it's lifestyle and nutrition medicine. And I am working on a book again, and the name of my book, and I think somebody said that here, I think Khetnu, you said it, or somebody in the chat may have said it, that the name of my book is called Your Body Already Knows, and it kind of allows you to tap back into that wisdom. I always joke that deer doesn't wake up complaining, oh my God, I have to wake up early in the morning and I need to eat plants to be healthy. I think they know, all of us, we really have this really strong connection with nature, and we already know how we're supposed to live, and that's really what the book talks about. So thank you.
Sweet. Thank you so much, Nidhi. Look forward to seeing your new book also. Khetnu or Jim?
Yeah, so many books, but since it's the last day of Black History Month, but every day is Black History, but I would be remiss if I didn't mention Lucretia Van Dyke's book, African American Herbalism. For those who are looking for traditional African American herbal traditions from around the diaspora, she does a great job of discussing that. I may have a small blurb in there as well, so there's that as well. And to learn more about me, my personal business is called A Soulful Touch Wellness. My website is kind of up. I'm in the process of rebranding and all of that, so it's a soulfultouch.com, asoulfultouch.com. And the website to my herbal conference for Black and Indigenous herbalists and community, the Gullah Geechee Herbal Gathering, is gullahgeecheeherbalgathering.com. And and I'm sure if you Google Khetnu Nefer, you're going to find me somewhere on the World Wide Web. So there's that. And thank you again, Jiling and Jim and Nidhi, for this conversation. It's been a real pleasure. I've learned a lot of things and got a lot of confirmation about a lot of things as well. And to the listeners, and especially Mountain Rose Herbs, for this opportunity, I'm very grateful.
Wow, thank you so much, Khetnu. And Gullah Herbal Conference, is that happening this year?
It is not. I'm taking a break, but there'll be some smaller things around the conference this year. I'm working on really connecting more with Black farmers and gardeners to have a pipeline for herbalists to really be able to connect and, you know, be mindful of the bioregional things around them and have that pipeline so they can, work together and have what they need locally as well. Um, and also a couple years ago, I was diagnosed with lupus, so I've been healing from that and trying to put on a conference by myself is very taxing to my immune system, which is why Holy Basil and ashwagandha has been my best friends. And so there's that. So just trying to rebrand and get the support of community and build a tribe around the conference so it doesn't look like I'm Superwoman. And it'll be happening again in the spring of 2026. I haven't divined on the date yet, but it's coming soon.
Heal well, Khetnu. Thank you so
Good
much for
thing.
bringing the community together in that way. Jim McDonald.
Yeah, I'm also going to sing the praises of Lucretia Van Dyke's African American Herbalism. I think it's an important book to get. I think that some people might be like, oh, that's like a niche book. It's not a niche book. It's a book that is covering something that is really dramatically remiss and absent from the larger North American, herbal community and the way that people learn. So it's real. And plus, Lucretia is just awesome. I met her at the last free herbalism project that I was at, and we hung out. And I'm like, we are friends. I want to see you as often as possible. And that's happened once since then. Not enough, but really good. I would also say that when people ask me, like, I'm beginning herbalism. Like, what are some great books I can start with? One of the first things I have to say is get books by herbalists, because you want to get a book by someone who uses the herbs that they're talking about and has a lot of experience. So get books by herbalists. Don't always get books that have the most information in them. If a book has like, and I'm not saying that there's no one who knows like 300 herbs, but if a book has 300 herbs and there's short little, like maybe 3 or 4 or 5 sentence paragraphs about each herb, it's not a lot of information. And so two books that I find myself recommending all the time, and this is out of many that I could, is if you want a book on plants that covers a lot of what is available throughout North America, Rosalie de la Forêt and Emily Hahn's Wild Remedies is just a great book. It's beautiful. It has great recipes in it. They're both salad herbalists and salad practitioners, and they're presenting information with an energetic slant. So it really looks at qualities of people and plants, without it being like inaccessible. So they do a really good job at making that information accessible. And with regards to like the actual learning about the practice of herbalism, I love Maria Noel Grove's book, Body into Balance. It's another beautiful book that covers different organ systems, and that one is maybe more focused on sort of like thinking like an herbalist rather than just, I have this problem, what herb do I take from that problem? And I think she does a great job at framing that also in a very accessible way. In terms of my work, while I am working on books, they are not there yet. I teach throughout Michigan and throughout the country and also online. My website is herbcraft.org. Within a few months, that website will be redone and look a lot better on your phone than it does right now. But there's also hours upon hours upon hours of free YouTube videos. If you search on YouTube, my website has hundreds of pages of plant monographs and articles on herbalism. I've tried to really put a lot of information out there that's freely available, so that if anyone wants to sign up for either in-person or online courses, which you can also find at herbcraft.org, they've got an idea what they're getting into and where I'm coming from, right? So like putting information out there lets people figure out that like, oh, I like the way that he presents information, and I think that this would be a good fit for me because my course is not dramatically better than, other people's courses. It's just different. And I think that when we're learning about herbs, looking for the person who is able to convey information in a way that resonates real well with you is like, that's the clincher, rather than like the person who's quote unquote the best or who knows the most. It's like the way that it's taught works for the way that you learn. And if the way that I teach works for you, if you like humor and jokes and puns, some of which are very dated, I might be a good fit. You can check out my stuff. And you can remember herbcraft.org, or you can just Google Jim McDonald and herbalist, and that will pull stuff up.
Fabulous.
You,
Thank you so
Jiling,
much.
what about you?
Thanks. Thanks, Jim.
I just wanted to MC for a little bit before it's all over.
Oh, yeah. You could be the next MC. So, Chinese medicine books. A lovely place to begin is a newer book by Erin Masako Wilkins, who wrote Asian American Herbalism. And there's a great introduction to Chinese medicine in there and herbal energetics. And what I love most, perhaps, is there's fabulous recipes throughout the book. So it makes the Chinese medicine concepts, which can be very conceptual, grounded in kitchen medicine. If you want to get deep into Chinese medicine and really go down the rabbit hole and go to Chinese medicine school, usually in herb classes, the book that's recommended is about 3 inches tall, Bensky. And it's a massive book. It's long. I find it a great resource for looking things up, but not a bedtime read at all. For growing herbs, Juliet, oh, what's her Chestnut School? What's her last name? Juliet's book.
Blancaspore.
What?
Blancaspore.
Juliet Blanketspore. Juliet Blanketspore's book about growing your herbal garden. And then Maria also has a book about growing your herbal garden. For medicine making, Thomas Easley has a lovely book with some medicine making in the beginning and then materia medica at the end. Oh, gosh, so many books. On my website, which is the place to find out all else about me, jilinglin.com. If you go to jilinglin.com/library, I have a massive list of book recommendations that includes Chinese medicine recommendations, herbal recommendations, 5-element specific recommendations, and much else. Somatics, and I have a penchant for memoirs, so big list of memoirs. And I teach at conferences and little workshops. I'm trying to teach more locally here in Southern California. I also teach online, and my book that I'm working on is about 5-elements lifestyle medicine that'll hopefully be done by next year. But the publishing industry is very slow, so we'll see what happens. And Tea Talks Roundtable that you can listen to on herbal radio through Mountain Rose Herbs, wherever it is that you listen to your podcasts. So I hope that you found today's talks interesting and helpful and inspiring, and hope you had a good time getting to know some of the wisdom from Jim McDonald, Khetnu Nefer, and Nidhi Pandya, and myself, Jiling Lin. And thank you so much for joining us today. So for everyone who signed up to attend today's Free Herbalism project, you'll receive a post-event email, which will be coming anywhere between a few days to up to 3 weeks. And that'll have a recording of today's events and a bonus perk. So this year, all attendees will receive a complimentary ticket for a special viewing of Farming While Black, which is a feature film based on the book by Leah Penniman about the rising generation of young Black farmers. So if you haven't yet signed up for today's event, you can still do that by visiting the link that's provided in the chat. And the event sign-up form will be removed on March 1st, which is tomorrow. So be sure to sign up ASAP to get the recording and the details for the special viewing of Farming While Black. So again, the post-event email might take up to 3 weeks to arrive, so be patient. sip some tea, go spend some time outside. It's springtime. Life is fantastic. At least for the plants, life is fantastic, and there's much to be grateful for. So again, thank you so much for being here with us today. And thank you so much, presenters, Jim, Khetnu, Nidhi, for being here with us. And thank you to Mountain Rose for hosting the Free Herbalism Project.
Thank you, Jiling.
Yeah. Farewell, all. Thank you so much for being a part of this.
Yes.
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye.